Country President, Luis, Acts of Freedom. I'll ask the mayor, Senator John Williams.
Thank you. I try to think every year, like you said, what's amazing is, and I've decided to probably not get myself in trouble, but just bring you up to date on what I think is going on now. If you look at the sacrifices this country made over the years in Iraq, and the sacrifices that we made with our personnel, their losses of life, their combat duty, their duty and their honor to their country. And then after all those sacrifices, the first time that that country is able to defend itself, they run. Now if that don't make you sick, nothing will. This country has always performed up to standard and with honor and integrity. And sometimes when they do, and then the people that they died for, and the people that they sacrificed for, don't have the courage to stand up and defend their own country, it makes you sick. Also over the weekend I was watching a movie about MacArthur, Gregory Peck, and his last address to West Point, when he, famous words, the core, the core, the core, he repeated in no uncertain terms, duty, honor, and country. That's one of the things I think is overlooked today. It's duty, honor, and country. So it's just one of those things where I watch and I know, and I've talked to people who served in war. I've talked to people who served in Vietnam, World War II, and all over. But when you see your country let down by the ones that you supported, it makes you sick. So I've always believed, and will continue to believe, that this country will perform. Our military has performed outstanding tasks year after year, conflict after conflict, answered the call every time. And they look at the old-fashioned way, duty, honor, and country. So that's about as brief as I can get. I failed to recognize the amount of people that serve our city, that are here today, that are here every year. Donna Lake is president of the council. She is here. Joe Sanker, Ward 3 council member, is here. John Mumper, which nobody likes, is here. Ward 4 councilman, and Chris Brown, our law director, is here. And if I've missed anybody, I apologize. So I wanted to keep my remarks brief, but if you know me, you know sometimes I have a tendency to say what I think. So thank you so much.
I want to introduce our honorary speaker, General Tom O'Brien.
I'll try to, get through before the raindrops go. And I think it's my 48th time to be here in Norwood. At least it seems like that. Mayor said I've lived here long enough not to leave. And he's made it special since it's just that section. Hey, we think about Memorial Day, and we all know when it started, 1868, and it was right after the Civil War. And it's continued ever since. And yeah, some of it's lost its original purpose. And listening on the radio today, I was listening to one of the guys on WLW, and he was only taking calls from people who had a real memory of what this day is. In other words, people who had served, people who had lost relatives, and some of the stories were pretty poignant. But I thought it might be handy to reflect upon the number of casualties that have actually been in our wars. The Revolutionary War military deaths, U.S. military deaths, were 4,435. Wounded was probably 6,500. Records weren't as precise as they might have been. There were a couple of small wars like we've seen today, like the Barbary Wars. We had a total of 15 people killed. That's where the Marines went over the top at Tripoli and where they got their sword from. The War of 1812, which was kind of a goofy war, people in New England didn't want it. The people out in what we would now call the West, which is us, which was the West in those days, they did. Deaths were 2,260, and wounded were about 4,500. Moving on up to the Indian Wars, which was fought, as we know, by the U.S. Army and the cavalry. We've all seen the John Wayne movies and all that stuff. Military deaths over a period roughly 70 years, running, were about 1,000. The total number of people who served was 106,000. Let's move on to the Mexican War, which General Grant called the most unjust war he ever saw. Military deaths were 13,283, but only 1,700 were combat. That's where disease started to take over. And it was particularly yellow fever down in Mexico that, there was no treatment for it, and it just went through the ranks like the Spanish influenza. Total number serving during the Mexican War, regulars and volunteers, 78,000. Now you move on to the Civil War, and of course here we had Americans fighting Americans. Union military deaths, which I really question this number, they have here 364,000. Now, 140 of those were deaths in combat. And the problem was, again, during the Civil War, hygiene had not quite caught up to where it should be, and a lot of people died of what they call camp fever, and swamp fever, and various things, measles, various things of that nature. Spanish-American War, we had a total serving in that little conflict of 3 months of 306,000 people. Volunteers, yes. Military deaths were 2,400, but only 385 actually killed in action. So the rest of them succumbed to fever, disease, particularly down in the tropics down there where they were fighting it in Cuba. Philippine insurrection, U.S. military deaths, 4,200 people. Wounded, 2,800 people. The Moros were tough people. That went on for 3 years. You get into our later conflicts here. Uh-oh, there goes my speech. That's bad. Pick it up.
And we got it. I got that problem too, Jim.
It only takes 2 of them to get, don't worry about it. Moving on to World War I, which was of course our first big, what we'll call, global conflict. And if I can find World War I on here. There he is. Actually, we had a slight intervention in Mexico in 1914 when Pancho Villa was running around. And we actually had 21 battle deaths. Amazing. Jason the Pancho Villa. World War I, our first big global conflict. 116,000 casualties, of which 53,000 were battle deaths, and that was only a year and a half that we actually had troops in combat during World War I. It was amazing. The total number serving, 4.7 million. Now you move on to World War II. U.S. military deaths in World War II, 405,000. Wounded, 670,000. Battle deaths, of course, were 291. Again, you had accidents, not so much disease, but you had a lot of training accidents. You had, things happened quite outside of the combat zone. The amazing thing, the total number of serving, World War II, 16 million. 16 million people served in World War II. Amazing. Unfortunately, we're losing them at 1,000 a day. The Cold War, total number of people actually served, 35 million people were on active duty during the period of the Cold War. Berlin airlift, U.S. military deaths, 31 people. Korean War, where's Jerry? Jerry knows about this one. U.S. military deaths, 36,000, of which 33,000 were actually in combat. So we had a better ratio there. Wounded, 102,000. Total serving in the theater, 1.7 million people over the 3 years. Amazing. Bear with me. It'll take long. When we move on to Afghanistan and present, U.S. military deaths, 3,315 as of March of this year. 1,800 of those were battle deaths. You had a lot of flight accidents, bad weather, and things of that nature. Wounded, 20,000. Now we're familiar with the wounded, particularly from these modern wars in Afghanistan and the rest of it. They survived because of better battlefield medicine, and that we're able to evacuate people rapidly. The problem is we see the traumatic injuries that are often produced because the people survive. In earlier wars, maybe they didn't. Total serving, 831,000 people have been in and out of Afghanistan. That's amazing. Of course, if you look at the period, Iraqi freedom, battle deaths were 3,500. And Operation Inherent Resolve, 3 people. We also have people, it shouldn't be forgotten, we still have people in Bosnia, we still have people in Kosovo. We have people in odd places around the world. Every now and then one of them, unfortunately dies, killed in training, or as a result of some sort of action by the bad guys. So the main thing, I think, to remember on this particular Memorial Day, when we still have people in harm's way, and we still do, the thing to remember is, these numbers of people who've gone before. I mean, those are tremendous numbers. And at the present time, serving on active duty in our all-volunteer military, 1% of the population, 1% of the American population serves on active duty. Veterans, roughly 7% of the population represent veterans. It's something to think about, because what you do get out of it is it's the few who are serving the many. And those people who are the few, we really need to remember them. For those who are in bad way because of it, we need to take care of them. You look at the problems that the VA had, those things need to be addressed. Our current military does need upgrades in equipment. A lot of stuff has been, they're really not going to bring it back. It's not worth bringing back. Some of them will get deep sixed, and the rest of it will be left to rust in the desert, if you rust in the desert. You live to simmer in the desert. So our military does need upgrading, and it needs constant care and affection. So I know that all you people here who have military connections, you know what I'm saying, you believe it, and I'm always glad to come here to Norwood, because while we might have a small crowd because of the rain, you folks are here. I'm glad to see my fellow soldiers here. There we go. And all I can really say is God bless America.
Amen.
Thank you, General O'Brien, Mr. Mayor, my good friend, Norwood veteran Jerry Owens, who throws this little thing on every year. Thank you, Jerry. Members of American Legion Post 123, thank you for being here. Veterans and people of Norwood, my name is Steve Jesse. I was born and raised in Norwood, Ohio. I've been a resident off and on when I was overseas for 55 years, and it's my honor to participate in this event today. However, before I proceed, please allow me the opportunity to introduce the soldiers who join me here today. They are Sergeant McNeil, Specialist Farley, Specialist Kurtz, Specialist Jesse, and Sergeant Colbert. I invited them here today so they can see how some communities still recognize sacrifice, still honor what's been done on our behalf. And I'm glad you all could make it here, even though the weather hasn't looked all that hospitable. Thank you for coming. Now, we're going to move along to the lowering of the flag to half-mast. Then our rifle party will fire 3 volleys, a rifle salute. After which, my friend and fellow Norwood son, Dave Nee, will sound taps. During this time, it's important to realize that we're doing this to salute those who in the past, like President Lincoln said, gave their last full measure of devotion to the defense of this country. That's why we're here. That's who we're saluting. Be it known, all veterans are encouraged to render a hand salute during that time. All non-veterans could simply please place your hand over your heart. Thank you. Firefighter, if you would, please. Stand by. Fire party, please fire your salute at this time. Present. Oh. Hold up.
This concludes our service here for today. Thank everyone for coming around. And I want to thank Skyline Chili, Bluebird Restaurant, Roses, Blue Ann's Beauty Salon for all their help on putting up the signs around the community. Thank you all for coming.